So we start a high-level strategic dialogue between China and the United States, which has wrapped up in Anchorage in the U.S. state of Alaska. China says the discussions were candid, constructive and helpful, but differences remain. China was represented by the Communist Party of China's senior foreign affairs official Yang Jiechi and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Leading the U.S. delegation was Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The Chinese delegation said the leadership of the Communist Party of China was the choice of history. It was supported by a high degree of consensus among the Chinese people and the international community. They also said the security of China's socialist system should not be damaged and that red line should never be crossed. China added it has no intention of interfering in the political system of the U.S. The Chinese side stated that the essence of the bilateral ties is mutual benefit, not a zero-sum game. China said the United States do not necessarily pose a threat to each other. Differences do not constitute a reason for confrontation between the two sides. Senior Chinese officials have described the dialogue as candid, constructive and helpful, as we just reported, but they also say differences remain between the two sides. Take a listen.
Our communication with the American side in the strategic dialogue was candid, constructive and helpful, but there are many major differences between the two sides. China is determined to safeguard our national sovereignty and security. The development of China is an unstoppable trend. The communication and dialogue this time was a very important follow-up to China's President Xi Jinping's telephone call with President Biden. We hope that the two sides can enhance the communication and dialogue on different fronts. The two parties should follow the principles of no conflict to guide our relations, so that we can look forward to a healthy and stable relationship.
We came to the U.S. this time in a spirit of sincerity, but I believe the dialogue should follow the principle of seeking common ground despite differences. You should not only put forward demands from one side. Some differences should be addressed. The dialogue and communications, some of the regional conflicts could also be addressed through control and management. We have reiterated to the U.S. that sovereignty and territorial integrity are key issues. We hope the U.S. is not going to underestimate China's determination to defend its territory, to safeguard its people, and uphold its rights. We hope that China and the U.S. can move forward while respecting each other's core interests. On this basis, China is willing to adopt an open attitude towards the U.S.
For more on this dialogue, let's cross live to our reporters Mark New in Anchorage and Tu Huiao in Beijing. Let me start with you, Mark. Give us a main takeaway of the two-day dialogue in Alaska.
That's right, Pendung. I'm here in the chilly Alaska right now, and behind me is the Hotel Captain Cook, where all the negotiations went down. It did get off to a rocky start on Thursday, day one in two sessions. Offense taken pretty much early on by the tone, and then also accusations of going beyond the allotted time. So both sides kind of looking at each other, and in the first few minutes practically, with the media there present, talking about protocol violations and pointing fingers at each other. But they all returned and they came back to the table, so it wasn't like they were offended and walked away. They all came back, did their business, and it seemed to sort of be a warming mood today. Not to say that there weren't some contentious issues. CBC Politburo member Yang Jiechi said the dialogue was very constructive, but that there were still many differences between the two sides. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said they knew they'd be at odds going in over China's actions in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet, Taiwan, and cyberspace. Yang countered that by saying that China is going to safeguard its sovereignty, but there were areas of understanding too. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi emphasized the two countries should move towards respecting each other's co-interests. And Antony Blinken brought up the idea of intersecting interests, particularly on Iran, the DPRK, Afghanistan, and climate change. So while there were a lot of differences, they did seem to, at least for today, find some common ground. Now, no one knows exactly what's going to happen next, but many issues still need to be reflected upon. After all, both sides said coming in they didn't expect a resolution of many things. It was more to fill each other out and hear where each other stood on a certain stance. Blinken said he told the Chinese side regarding economic trade, the economy, trade, and technology, huge issues going into this, that they needed to consult with the U.S. Congress, allies, and partners before moving forward on these crucial issues. He also said how they proceeded would depend on how it impacts their workers and their businesses. So giving some insight that, both sides need to sort of collect some of the thoughts, hear where everybody stood, go back, talk with their respective colleagues, and with how it's viewed within their own administration before moving forward on some of those issues. So a time for reflection as to what will be the next step. Panda.
Thank you very much, Mark New in Anchorage. Now let's go to Tu Huiao in Beijing. Huiao, tell us China's reaction to this dialogue so far.
Hello there, Pandan. Experts on diplomacy have been saying for quite some time that the fundamental nature of the China-U.S. relationship has changed, and there's no going back, only moving forward. And this strategic dialogue seems to have underscored that point loud and clear because there are just so many areas where both countries are at odds. And China has shown that it will stand firm in the face of U.S. criticism, especially in regards to human rights and democracy. But there is a silver lining to the reality as well. Both sides have left this meeting with more clarity, clarity on what the other side thinks on these contentious issues. For example, Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi have reiterated over the last 2 days that China would not make concessions on red line issues such as sovereignty, security, and its core interests. And they urge the U.S. side to see things in the correct way and objective light, not to cross those lines. For example, the U.S. should give up attempts to change China's systems, because I'm going to quote here, the Communist Party of China has the heartfelt support of 1.4 billion Chinese people, and no one can deprive the Chinese people of their right to pursue a better life. Now, once these bottom lines are met, there are areas of aligned interest for cooperation, including climate change, the pandemic, and the Korean Peninsula. Yang said that these are the pressing challenges that both sides can work on, and China is willing to work with the U.S. on these challenges. Now, it is important to note that Antony Blinken is scheduled to visit Brussels next week for a meeting of the 29 foreign ministers of NATO. This follows Biden's virtual hosting of the Quad and Blinken's visit to Tokyo and Seoul. So issues related to China are likely to come up again. What will they discuss and potentially agree on? Will there be a statement issued by both sides that are hostile to China? Beijing will keep tabs on that for sure. So in English, there's a phrase called walk the talk. Beijing certainly expects that from the U.S. side. Back to you, Pandan.
Thank you very much, our reporter Tu Huiao in Beijing. For more insights, we're joined in the studio by Ms. Su Xiaohui from the China Institute of International Studies and Professor Joseph Gregory Mahoney in the U.S. city of New Orleans. Let me start with you, Ms. Su. So, China has been quite straightforward, talking about its fundamental political system and social institution and calling them a red line that the United States should never cross. Why is that?
Well, straightforward is the right word, Pandong. As you may notice, that China believes that it is a time for the China and the United States to try to get along with each other. And China believes that the precondition for the two countries, two major powers, to get along with each other is that the two sides understand each other in a better way. So China is sending out clear signals to the United States. As for the political system and social institutions, China believes that every country has its own rights to choose the path or choose the approach for development. And as for China, first of all, China believes that China's political system, including the position and the role of the Communist Party of China, is China's decision, and the Communist Party of China will be vital for China's development in the future. And at the same time, China believes that the two countries will have a chance to talk to each other, to learn from each other. China respects the choices of the United States, but at the same time, China believes that the mutual respect is of key importance for the two major powers to get along with each other.
Professor Mahoney, what do you make of this red line marked by China? And if you recall, CPC Politburo member Mr. Yang Jiechi also made it very clear that China believes in shared values of mankind, including democracy and freedom.
You know, I think one of the key issues here, obviously, and we've seen it rise in Hong Kong and Xinjiang and elsewhere, is the fundamental question of sovereignty. And I don't think that the West really understands how serious this is for China. I think the West takes sovereignty for granted, having emerged during the modern period ahead of some of the other developing countries, and having actually contributed, of course, to a lot of the problems, and we might say still contributing to a lot of the problems of the developing world when it comes to sovereignty. So clearly this is such a core issue for Beijing's leaders. It's such a key element of really the whole rhetoric of political legitimacy as it relates to national rejuvenation. So I think that this is just something that China is going to have to keep saying over and over again before people really begin to understand it.
So, Professor, having mentioned that, what do you make of China's stance reiterated in this dialogue on Sino-US relations? The core principles, mutually beneficial, the bilateral ties are not a zero-sum game. Do you think this time the United States or the Biden administration has got this message loud and clear?
I think the Biden administration, has heard this, and clearly this was said during the Trump administration as well. I think the real problem with the Biden administration right now is that it's a bit confused about which direction it really wants to take. It's got this three-handed approach. It wants to cooperate, compete, and contain. And these are three separate objectives that are really difficult to bring together neatly within an overarching strategic vision or consistent foreign policy. And, there's clearly quite a number of disconnects there with what China is saying in terms of how they want to approach the relationship. So, yeah, I think this is just going to continue to be a difficulty between both sides.
Ms. Su, what do you make of the principles reiterated by China regarding Sino-US relations? Do you think the Biden administration will actually listen to this principle?
Well, I believe that the Biden administration will attach great importance to China, and including China's positions and principles and China's actions. As you may notice that before the dialogue happened, the two sides tried to reach out to each other in different ways. As for the United States, it seems that the Biden administration did a lot of arrangements, play a lot of arrangements around China, including the court meetings and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense to this visit to Asia. So this means that the United States was anxious in dealing with China, and this reflects the fact that the Biden administration attaches great importance to China's action and would like to play with China with so-called advantage in positions and in political opinion. So it is the time for the United States to try to understand that China has the bottom line. China will try to work with the United States on specific issues, including regional and international issues. But at the same time, there's some parts that China is consistent in the policies, like the sovereignty and territorial integrity, or the political system, or human rights. Some parts that China will be consistent in the policies that will not compromise with the United States.
So you are saying that China has been consistent in dealing with the United States, and now the ball is in the US court. So talking about specific issues, thorny ones like Xinjiang issue, China calls it the biggest lie of the century created by Western countries, especially the United States. So do you see a kind of end to this kind of smearing campaign regarding China's internal affairs?
Well, I would say that for the internal affairs, China is watching what the Biden administration is doing, not specifically towards China, but also towards the other countries in the world, including some important U.S. allies in the world. It seems that the Biden administration utilized values and ideology as kind of tool to sum up its allies to try to build up the U.S. position, the U.S. standing in the world. So it is a time for China to clarify that the domestic affairs is within the administration of the Chinese government, not within the administration of the other countries. So China would like to talk to the other countries about the facts, about the developments in the region, but there's no chance for the United States to try to force China to compromise on the policies and to follow the tongue of the Western countries.
So, Professor Mahoney, I still recall that on day one of this dialogue, you mentioned the importance of looking at possible positive aspects of this round of dialogue. Now the official outcome has been out. What do you make of potential areas the two countries can actually work on in the near future?
Well, you know, we've seen some very thin platitudes from both sides that they had their differences, but they had a lot of constructive dialogue. Again, I think that we're going to see fragmented and very slow but real progress made on economic front. This is really I think a much bigger issue for the United States at this point than China, particularly as the U.S. tries to restart its economy. So I think that's what we're really going to see in the next few weeks, is the Biden administration trying to get ahead of this story in this very contentious domestic media in the United States and start building the case for reversing or in some way negating some of the trade war. I think there's other low-hanging fruit. To some extent, some cooperation on the pandemic. But then again, the U.S. isn't really doing much to help the world in that front anyway. And then perhaps some climate change. But aside from rejoining the Paris Agreement, there's not much that really needs to be done at this point either in terms of actual cooperation other than just sharing the same principle. So my expectation is let's look for where things really matter, the economy, and let's see how that may become a spear point for other issues, something that will help drive other things forward in progressive ways.
Thank you very much, Professor Joseph Gregory Mahoney and Ms. Su Xiaohui there. You're watching Global Watch on CGTN.